I recently finished going through a handful of books looking at different ways to evaluate scientific progress. They are For and Against Method, which is a combination of a lecture series by Imre Lakatosh, as well as an essay by Paul Feyerabend, and then it contains several correspondence between those two professors. Another book is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn, which I'll detail in a second. And the third is Against Method, which is by Paul Feyerabend as well, where he goes into greater detail and elaborates his position. So in this, I'm just going to kind of go through the three schools and give some quick thoughts about them. And then in future videos, I want to dive deeper into each one and try to figure out what I think is the best way of going about things. So in the lecture series, which is found in For and Against Method, Imre Lakatosh has a lecture series called Lectures on Scientific Method. And the lecture structure splits evaluating scientific progress into three main camps. Okay, so a trichotomy of evaluating scientific research. Those three camps are demarcationism, which he puts himself as well as his predecessor Popper into. Then there's epistemological anarchism, which is where Paul Feyerabend is. And then finally, Lakatosh describes this elitist authoritarianism school, which I think is poisoning the well to begin with, but that's where he puts Kuhn and a few other people. Let's get into it. So the first one is demarcationism. And the goal of demarcationism is to try to come up with some sort of systematic way of deciding if a scientific research program is good or if it's bad. And the backdrop to this that he mentions a few times in the lecture series is, there's so many papers that are produced, there's a lot of funding that goes into science. How do we pick good research programs and bad research programs? So that's what he describes as the main issue of demarcation. So he begins by puts Karl Popper into this. Popper's big thing was that scientific theory needs to be both self-consistent and falsifiable. But what's really interesting is Lakatosh takes that idea and applies it to someone like Newton, and basically shows that if Popper's criterion were applied to Newton, Newton should have never published. And an example of that is Newton was able to describe the motion of certain planets, but he could never actually describe the moon. So there was some sort of clear inconsistency within Newton's early theories that if that was the case, then he should have never published, because there's something so obviously wrong with the theory it can't even describe the moon. Why publish? So off the bat, Popper seems too strict. Lakatosh replaces this with progressive and degenerating programs. So trying to decide if a research program is progressive or if it's degenerating. And the main thing is as scientific facts pop up, a progressive program will be able to sort of absorb those, come up with explanations that then allow for new experiments to be done. And those new experiments can kind of produce novel results. A degenerating program will just have some sort of ad hoc explanation without being really able to do anything new. Okay? So that's the main way that he tries to split it. And just to summarize demarcation, the goal is to try to come up with a systematic way of evaluating programs that anyone can do. Okay. Now, this is totally the exact opposite of this is epistemological anarchism, which is developed by Feyerabend, where he basically says there is no rule. If you have any rule, you can always find a way to, you can find an example where it doesn't work, and any sort of program that worked in one time period isn't going to work in another time period. Okay, and he identifies it with Dadaism, which is an art movement, and I'll just try to quote here. So this is from page 115 of For and Against Method. This is Feyerabend's thesis on anarchism, where he says, Feyerabend is quoting Hans Richter, saying, to be a true Dadaist, one must also be an anti-Dadaist. So he goes on to say, now this is Feyerabend now, quote, his aims remain stable or change as a result of argument or of boredom or of conversion experience or because he wants to impress some people and so on. Given some aim, he may try to reach it with the help of an organized group or alone. He may appeal to reason or to emotion. He may decide to proceed violently or in a peaceful manner. His favorite pastime is to confuse rationalists by inventing compelling reasons for unreasonable doctrines. There is no view, however absurd or immoral, he refuses to consider or to act upon, and no method he regards as indispensable. The only thing he opposes, positively and absolutely, are universal standards, universal laws, universal ideas such as truth, justice, honesty, reason, and the behavior they engender. Okay, end quote. So he's basically saying there is no way. Now, there is no way to judge it, and you should just let everyone do what they want to do. Now, I think the biggest thing I've learned from reading Firebrand is he brings up great examples of how trying to apply some sort of method, you can always find examples that it doesn't work. So there's interesting historical examples that he brings to the table. However, in my opinion, if you're trying to decide who to fund, it just doesn't make sense. It's not a very useful way of deciding, who the National Science Foundation should fund, who should receive the grant money. It's just not very useful, and it's very 1960s, 1970s, basically. Okay. So this third school that Lakatos introduces is the elitist school, or he also calls it the authoritarianism school. And the idea behind the elitist or authoritarian school is that, and this is coming from Lakatos, so it's sort of from his view of it, but he basically says that, yes, there is good science and bad science. According to the elitists, there is good science and bad scientists, but the only people that are going to be able to tell are the best of the scientists. So it's not codifiable, and it's not systematic how you decide what is good science or bad science. It's really scientists themselves and the best amongst the scientists that are going to sort of guide the field and try to make that decision making. What are good programs and what are bad programs. Now, he puts Kuhn into this group and basically says that Kuhn added nothing compared to some other authors. But I read Structures of Scientific Revolution, and I think it's pretty interesting, actually. It provides a pretty plausible way of how these things happen. So in Kuhn's sort of program, there's some sort of established paradigm, and that's, that would be Newton bringing, classical mechanics, basically, the theory of gravity. And it sort of establishes a worldview, it establishes a way of doing science, it establishes normal methods for everyone to basically, and it establishes what problems people should go after, how they should go about doing it. So people do normal science, they do their experiments, they don't have anything radically new, and they sort of articulate, they do this process of normal science in which they articulate the paradigm. So they get it more and more detailed, they find out how to explain certain anomalies, it gets, you get increasing detailed explanations, but within the framework that's accepted. Now, over the course of this, you'll begin to accrue anomalies. So things that really don't make sense, you can't explain it using whatever the form of mathematics at the time or the way of thinking about the world. And then those accrue enough that some new people come along, there's a crisis in the field, and people sort of reevaluate the basic assumptions. So you can think of the transition, the prototypical explanation is kind of the transition from classical mechanics into relativistic mechanics, right? So certain planetary motion wasn't quite working, or it wasn't quite explainable by classical mechanics. So Einstein comes along, has relativistic mechanics. It does a better job at explaining planetary motion. Therefore, classical mechanics is now replaced with relativistic mechanics. And the main kind of this is a criticism I think that people bring to Kuhn, but where I like it a lot is he relies a lot on sociological explanation of why certain theories replace, certain new theories replace older theories. A lot of it has to be with that you have newer scientists that, replace older scientists. You have, strong personalities that might push certain theories over another one. And I think it's a more organic explanation of why some theories, overcome other ones. And that explanation, the people like Lakatos don't really like this because it doesn't seem objective, I guess. It suggests that there's not really an objective, some new theory is not necessarily objectively better than the other one. It might just be, it might replace the older theory just because of sociological reasons. So those are sort of the three camps. In future videos, I want to dive deeper into them and give kind of more detailed examples, and try to kind of come to some sort of conclusion. But as of now, I would definitely put myself kind of in the camp of Kuhn. So if you like this video, if you have any questions, or if I screwed anything up, please leave something in the comments. All right, thank you.